So really lucky to have our panel this morning, and really lucky to have Matt Rosica.
It's close enough.
No, I'm
It's a good ethnic name.
All right, no, Matt Rosica.
Rosichka
Okay.
is it?
Rosichka. Okay, all right, I'm really sorry.
That's
But
okay.
Matt, we were able to recruit Matt at the last minute because I knew that I would be inadequate to this task. And Matt has got a long history in investing, Pittsburgh native, Duquesne and undergrad Notre Dame MBA, but he joined Duquesne University about a year ago, right, as the chief investment officer. So we're going to really be interested in his perspective on this subject, which is really, I mean, this topic really goes to the heart of the CIS mission and how we align. And I know we probably weren't talking about it maybe enough yesterday, but I think that today is we've got a real focus on it. So, but aligning Catholic values with investing. And then we're also very lucky to have our friend Tom Skiba, who is, I'm going in order down the.
Okay, right. Okay.
And you know, Sister Suzanne got a lot of, you know, she got last night. She had a big, you know, and then she could get a big build up today. So, but Tom's another donor, but. Long, successful career as a CPA with partner with Ernst & Young, and then formed his own firm in Fort Wayne. He's the bishop's go-to guy in Fort Wayne. He's the chair of the audit committee. He's chair of the investment committee. He's the president of the community foundation. He's on the finance committee. I mean, there's like maybe some other people like to do some of those jobs. But,
I'm retired. It's okay.
Yeah, but, yeah. So but Tom's been a great friend of CIS and a very thoughtful advocate for Catholic investing. So we're lucky to have Tom here today. And then finally, Sister Suzanne Brennan, who you met last night when she gave that wonderful blessing at dinner. And if you look at her biography, Sister, I'm going to leave out, I'm going to miss some stuff, but you've been CEO of 3 hospitals, right? You've run a bunch of social service programs. You've been the treasurer or the responsible person for the investing for your community for a long time. You're a really good skier, we know that. But you've got like so many religious women, incredible background, incredible professional background, and so. But she's really been a very articulate advocate for. Particularly for impact investing and an advocate for really applying Catholic principles to her community's investment activity. So we're really lucky. Now, the good thing is we got Matt from Pittsburgh. We got a little geographic diversity because Sister's in South Bend and Tom's in Fort Wayne, but the same diocese. But anyway, so Sister, let's. I think some historical perspective would be really helpful, the kind of the journey that we've been on. And maybe you'd like to comment on that and then ask the other two to chime in.
We were on our pre-call talking about this, and one of the things that, as we were describing how we moved into things, I thought I've always been interested in social impact investing, and maybe not calling it that some time ago. And as Tom described, I have been CEOs of hospitals and so on. So the last time I was CEO was up in Alaska, and it is the last frontier. And so I decided at that point, as a religious, that I wanted to really go back and work with the poor. And so what I did, I returned to Salt Lake City, and I started a business for homeless people. And we had 3 areas of impact. General maintenance and landscaping and residential maintenance, cleaning. And so I did that, and I had to expand it to persons of low income also because they had telephones and the homeless didn't, and they didn't show up for their work, and somebody like myself had to go do it, you know. So we had an opportunity we have Holy Cross Ministries in Utah that does a lot of outreach and work with immigration and so on. And the CEO left that position, so they contacted me. And it is a sponsored ministry of Sisters of the Holy Cross. And they said, you know, would you do this? And I said, we know, you know, you've been out of this kind of thing for a while, administration and, you know, working directly with the poor and all. And, you know, do you think you'd like to make this change? And I had mowed 14 lawns the day before this interview. So I said, I think I could do that. So, but for me, it's always been a way to move. And so through the investments then of Sisters of the Holy Cross, we were able to make more of an influence and impact in that way. And looking at, you know, basically how do you empower people? How can you work with immigrants and refugees, and how can you empower people who are homeless or people who are low income like that? So it's always been a drive, and the Sisters of the Holy Cross also, about 20 years ago, we started what we called corporate stands. And I think our first one 20 years ago was on water. And then it's a nonviolence and so on. And everyone in the congregation studies that and then signs off that they're in support of it. So we've had that kind of orientation, I'll say. So it's kind of been a smooth run and a strong conviction of Holy Cross. So that's.
Tom, why don't you, obviously Bishop Rhodes has been intimately involved
Sure.
at the USCCB with the restated or the updated guidelines. Talk a little bit about your experience.
I will, but I'm going to interrupt just for a second. That I had the pleasure in my young Ernst and Ernst days of being one of the auditors on the Sisters of the Holy Cross, and actually worked on some of their hospitals. Sure, I had big public companies, but that was one of my great joys to learn about what they were doing. And we were talking same thing before in our pre-work, and I was reflecting on the Catholic schools that I went to. I was reflecting on what churches do in parishes. I was telling Matt, I got recruited right out of Notre Dame to be on a parish finance council and was elected to 4 two-year terms. And so that really got me started. So 50 years later, I'm still doing things with the bishop. And that's really a great topic, and we love what Catholic Investment Service is doing. We work with Bishop Rhodes and I wear 2 hats. It's the diocese and the foundation. And I have more fun with the foundation, raising money and doing the good and visiting where the money actually goes to. Bishop Rhodes was on the committee that did the revised USCCB guidelines. I love their publication on Social Responsible Investing 2022. The reason I mention that, because he has had to deal with the sharks on my investment committees. And these sharks go, well, how do you monitor those? And, you know, how do you make sure the guidelines and what percentage of your holdings are following the guidelines? And what procedures do you with the managers? So they actually had to write a publication to talk about the due diligence that they do. It's interesting when you talk about SRI, and it's everything Sister said. The good that we do, you know, we help the poor. Charity is really in our blood in the Catholic Church. So this history really carries over to how we invest. And Scott said it well yesterday, that we are using our purchasing power or investing power to do the social good. I find it interesting too, because the question then comes in, the Vatican has put out guidance, you know, on the earth, and we're one people, the needs of everyone in the world. And that is really not in SRI yet. But I think the next go round with the USCCB, that will be addressed. And so I think they had a nice words, I'll steal the Catholic Investment Service's words, we're inspired by those Vatican publications, and it will be more formalized with the next go round. So why we like Catholic Investment Services, and both the old bishop and our new one, that is a primary concern, that we're socially responsible investors. So.
But Matt, Duquesne's obviously got a long history of being a Catholic institution, and but you joined it more, a year ago. So maybe what was their thinking before you got there? How have you been thinking about all these issues?
Well, my path, I came from a foundation, and Scott's familiar with the foundation in Pittsburgh, and not unlike other industrial philanthropists out of Pittsburgh, think of Frick and Carnegie and Heinz and Mellon, Bill Dietrich wanted to give all his money away from the sale of his company. And so...
Kids get any money?
He did not give to his one daughter. He didn't want to burden her. And so Bill largely built a foundation to create benefit for Western Pennsylvania, mostly through education. And so he also believed that committees should be odd-numbered and three's too many. So, and so when I've had the professional blessing of working with the current president, CEO, and CIO there, Ed Greffenstedt, but for 11 years, it disadvantaged my role at Duquesne. So when I came to Duquesne, I told them right away, one, I didn't want the job. Two, I don't think I was equipped because I was part of a foundation whose sole objective was to grow assets, give it away over time, and we were 90% illiquid in private equity all over the world, across all stages. And so it was an interesting mousetrap to build, but it completely disadvantaged me to come to Duquesne. And I was very upfront with that. And so when they approached me, I asked two questions. One, give me an example when you had a long-term vision, you stuck to it. Because as Scott knows, this is a multi-decade endeavor to build an endowment office. And so we got through that. And then I asked about the governance. Duquesne is a Spiritan institution. It's the only Spiritan institution of higher education in the U.S. And maybe I'll take a minute, not for a plug on Duquesne, but just really to dovetail this with mission. It started in France. Jean-Baptiste, he's going to murder me for the pronunciation of the founder, but there was a son of a aristocrat, Desplaces, and he was a lawyer. As he finished his law degree in 1700, he was already guarded and could not tolerate the poverty of others, namely healthcare, education, and even access to faith. And so after completing his law degree, he gave it all up and started what now is the Spiritans. And so they made their way through Canada, and they eventually settled into Pittsburgh. Unsurprisingly, Pittsburgh at the time, in the 1870s, it was home to probably some of the worst living conditions in the world. Many of you know that Pittsburgh pretty much built the country and built largely the world through the industrial engine that went through it. And so much like the Jesuits' sole connection to God is through education, the Franciscans arguably could be through austerity. The Spiritans believe in uplifting the most abandoned souls, but in a humble way. So when I was an undergrad from Duquesne, coming back to Duquesne, I kind of went back to that founding order to truly appreciate it. And so one, it's extremely mission-based. Two, the Spiritans are great for humankind because they will uplift the most abandoned souls, and they've done a great job with first-time students. They're awfully bad at raising money for an endowment, though. So, I always felt the Jesuits were a little bit better. If you went to any sporting event in the Midwest, you'd probably see a Marquette sign somewhere in the airport or above the urinal. And so, and so I was. So we're a little bit humble in that regard. So my job is to embrace that mission, and the Spiritan mission again is one of uplifting the most abandoned souls. So I was disadvantaged, I think, taking the job, but I think coming from such a distinct background helped me re-underwrite its mission and also make me a better steward and fiduciary of kind of that mission of Duquesne.
So how had the university approached this before you got there? I mean, obviously there was some endowment. There's some endowment, right?
Cambridge client. It was largely a OCIO mandate, and simply the expression of the mission was in a screened index product by State Street. And so we still have that screened index. I talked to Jack and asked him why Vanguard doesn't have it, because we have Vanguard funds now. And so perhaps soon that will be a product, but it was expressed purely through a screened index product.
Got it. And are you thinking about different ways of?
I think the investment philosophy is in competitive developed markets, a passive approach is a prudent approach. So a screened index makes complete sense. In the private markets, I think a side letter, attorney to say, hey, if we need to opt out, we can opt out.
Well, that's what we have with our private market strategy in partnership with Hamilton Lane. We've got an opt out on all of our.
That's right.
So that's worked pretty well. Not sorry for the commercial, but that. So let's talk about the USCCB guidelines. Obviously, we spent a lot of time in the last year reflecting on the update. A lot of good things in the new version. A lot of folks in this room I know participated in some of that. Bishop Rhodes obviously was intimately involved in this. But do you, let me start with Sister, and I think I know the answer, but I think the group would benefit from it. Do you look at the guidelines as a floor or a ceiling? And you don't have to be, you can be nice about the bishops. You don't have to.
Okay. I think I would say we look at them as a floor. And a lot of investment policies, as you know, have changed from negative screenings to more positive screenings. So that was kind of a deal in changing these policies, and a lot of thought in religious women congregations to that, to say, yeah, we don't believe in pornography, so let's move on with this, or we don't believe in smoking, and so on. So I would say as a floor, and that we're waiting, for these to be updated, and I think we continue to wait, not wait, but encourage them to be updated more to aggressively address the needs more. So I would say
we were lucky again to have Jean-Baptiste talk to us last night about Minster and Bonham, which was, I think he was pretty modest about how important that has been in terms of just acknowledgement, recognition from the Vatican that these are issues, and I don't want to steal Bernard Brennickmeyer's thunder, but he likes to say that we're on a journey here, right?
Yeah.
And one size doesn't fit all, and that's the
evolving, to meet emerging needs all the time.
And Tom?
I would agree with Sister that I think, it's kind of a mandate with us. Thou shalt follow SRI investing guidelines. But I think we're embracing now much beyond that. Whether you call it impact investing, positive investing, faith-based investing, you can pick whatever words you prefer. But it's really those factors considering the environment. It's our common home. Or, we're really one earth. We're not sure we can get every country aligned with that, but it's really moving beyond that. What else can we do? We talked about our history with the Catholic Church, and the values are just, again, translating into our investing power. So it's kind of what I said. And to correct him, although I was from Fort Wayne, Indiana, I grew up about 10 miles here in Calumet City, Illinois. So a White Sox fan can't sit next to a Cub fan. So we left some space here.
So Tom and I share a lot of interests, including baseball, but not the same team. But Tom is also, having grown up in Calumet City, is a mafia aficionado. So he knew quite a number of wise guys growing up. I didn't know as many as you, but you had a little more firsthand experience with the dark side. But Matt, tell us what you're thinking about in terms of applying the guidelines and other other things.
Well, I agree with both of them. It is a floor for Duquesne. I think it's important to level set not just the portfolio impact. So I mentioned the screen index products on the public side and potentially opt-out language through a side letter on the private side. But I think from my perspective in anticipating, maybe not now, but down the road, if there's student activism, how do you manage that? And so using the guidance is important in the short term for portfolio implementation, but long term to level set the student body. I think it's important to engage the students, so if there is a concern that they have a place to voice it. So we've already thought about potential contingent committees to say, hey, if there is a concern by any constituent of the university, bring it to our attention. Faculty, staff will be represented, including myself. No cell phones. The rules are be prepared. So 1, write your position down. And 2, in advance, we'll prepare, and then we'll have an honest debate or discussion. No cell phones, no documentation, no minutes taken. If there's action needed for the board, that can be escalated. And so Duquesne has a unique 2-tier structure where the Spiritans do have special reserve powers of the university, and then there's the corporate board. And so when I joined, my earlier inquiries were, what can the Spiritans do in a special power from a governance standpoint? Can they make the endowment a piggy bank for whatever they want it to be? And so they calmed me that, no, that's not necessarily the concern. But for the guidance for Duquesne, I think it level sets the portfolio implementation, but it also helps manage student activism in really fostering engagement and debate. That's how we've used it. And
So that's, I mean, to me, really interesting, because I think higher ed, that's a distinct feature of higher ed. Is you've got these different constituencies. What issue have the students articulated concerns about specific issues?
It's been benign, and that's largely because it's been outsourced.
Yeah.
The endowment is only $550 million, so a sweet spot size institutionally, but still small. So over time, I think we're mindful that we might need this committee because there might be some activism down the road.
That being proactive on that is really, well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it may not seem like it, but we at CIS, we actually do a lot of listening, and we obviously the USCCB guidelines for us are a floor, and we've looked at lots of, and working with Sister and some of the other communities, we got a lot of feedback on fossil fuels, and again, that's so I'm thinking about students. Obviously, I would think, again, I'm projecting, but that climate issues would be something that you'd hear about from students, and that you've got a sort of a natural tension with your board, right? You've probably got some people on the board who are generous donors, but maybe aren't as sensitive to those issues, or more. And I think one of the things we want to avoid, certainly we try to avoid, is politicizing these issues and commercializing these issues, because there are a lot of both going on, right? But that's so. I think one of the things that's been interesting to us, and certainly in my experience, I guess a little over 3 years as CEO, is why don't more Catholic investors see this as a priority? I mean, I think we run into a lot of people, and there are a lot of reasons, and I think we've talked about a few of them. But why do you think, Sister? Why aren't people, making this a bigger priority?
Yeah, I think some time ago I mentioned to Tom about Laudato Si, and saying, how is this moving for you? And you said you ran into a couple little bumps, and which I think, sometimes I think about in our dealings with third world countries, it's easier for them to go from here to here without going through a number of different steps. And in this case, I think that's true also, that the need is so much more extreme in those places, and they are so far behind that it's easier to jump up to the other and address Laudato Si more quickly. But I guess in a broad sense, there's so many investments here in the United States in things that potentially will get into Laudato Si, that it will happen. And I was just thinking too, reflecting on, we're on the campus of St. Mary's College, and Notre Dame is across the street from us.
From them, she got that from them.
And that is, students will bring up, where are you on fossil fuels and all. And so sometimes you just have to slow it down a little bit and say, we're moving in this direction and it is going to happen. And I do believe it will happen. So it's being patient and moving forward in a paced way.
I think Sister's exactly right. The two things that are often brought up, more in the foundation side, are fossil fuels and investing in China. And so those are the issues. But I think Catholic Investment Services did some great survey work about the Catholic perspective investments. I guess I'll relate it to my foundation work, where we actually market that and say that, here's our investment philosophy. And I like to say it, the larger donors to the foundation are really asking for that. So while some object, we find the opposite, that people want us to be socially responsible investing. And then you can kind of shut that off, saying we follow SRR guidelines, and we're addressing the Vatican, the guidance that they had provided here that, again, we're trying to embrace. But I find the opposite, that we market it that way, and our mega donors or larger ones want us to follow the guidance.
I would just add, if you're going to overlay a constraint or a perceived constraint on a portfolio, you either, one, increase the risk profile, or two, lower the return prospects. And so when I first got to Duquesne, the thought was, well, let's just look at the screen index versus the unscreened index. And so there was no real degradation of performance. So starting with facts like that, I think can help reassure the committee that they're still honoring the prudent investor role while embracing the bishop's guidance. And so that's the only thing I would add. The first order of business was kind of looking at the different return streams and reassuring the committee that you can do both.
Yeah, I mean, so if without violating any HIPAA, I mean, can you tell us how your committee sort of, we've got a separate session on governance, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that, but I mean, how's your committee thinking about these issues? I mean, are these things you talk about?
Yep, we meet 3 times a year, and again, we talked early and often about policy and roles, responsibilities, decisions, anything that's not private. Effectively, one committee member says, if I can't undo it, you can't do it. And so effectively, I need approval for all privates. But for the publics, I think the hardest part is in emerging markets where you do have issues on labor, on healthcare. And so, Tom mentioned China as well. That's a hot button issue. And so I think that's the most challenging in emerging markets. But I think here it's, again, if you use a screened index, I think there's intellectual honesty there. I would also add, too, that to outsource it to State Street and say, okay, well, they screen based on MSCI parameters, that's not good enough for me. To achieve the trust transfer with my committee, since I am kind of a newbie CIO, I need to know the constituents and why they're on that list. And so, as direct indexing becomes more prevalent, I think it will evolve, we'll innovate, and we'll be able to, even a small investor like Duquesne, intellectually and honestly express a portfolio that says, hey, we embrace these guidelines, and we can do it in a cost-effective manner which achieves our investment objective and honors a prudent investor role.
I think that's a really good point, because we use those tools, but they're not the, I mean, that's one element of we've got this black box that we use for our restricted list, but that's one tool, but it's a much more thorough and thoughtful investigation. Tom, again, without revealing secrets, violating confidences, I mean, how does the committee, I mean, do you have robust, I mean, we obviously meet with your committee to report on our investment results and get your feedback, and we do talk about China, and we talk about,
There's a few sharks here today, so watch what you say, but we're in the Fort Wayne South Bend Diocese, so we get to cheat. We had Scott Malpass on our investment committees when I first joined the committees 15 years ago. We've had to replace him with 2 Notre Dame Investment Department people that are on our committees. Another member is a member of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago on their board of directors, bank presidents, hospital presidents. So it's really the quality of the people. You start with that. In my Ernst days, it was people, process, technology. So we have great people on those committees, and they're not afraid to shoot at them. And ask the tough questions about China, fossil fuels, et cetera. So beta risk and SPACs and good things like
Shorts.
that. The bishop said he never wants to come to another investment committee because he doesn't.
I don't either, but
he wants return like this. He wants positive return. So it's really the people that we have on the committees addressing those great topics. We meet 4 times a year, And again, we can leverage off of, and in fact, we're in September, we're at Notre Dame, so we can meet with their investment folks that are very tied to Catholic Investment Services. And with Scott, very tied to the Vatican. And our bishop said, well, I thought he was our guy. He's working with the Vatican. Sorry, I don't. So thank you for that too. That was a great discussion last night. So it's really the people on the committee.
I mean, Sister, you've got a great committee. You've got some really smart people on that committee.
Yeah,
And not that the others don't, but
And we are challenged by the members on the committee. And we have a economist who is, all of his work has been in Central America. And so he's always, challenging us to do something. And so, and we have a person who's been retired from a healthcare system, who was the CIO there. So we have challenges, but enjoy dealing with those and feel good about being challenged, because I think they know we will respond.
I mean, so one of the things that is interesting, I think, particularly for people outside of our community, and I don't mean the CIS community, I mean the Catholic community, is people assume that this is some sort of monolithic organization that the Pope says something, everybody does it, right, and jumps, and I mean, there's all of your institutions are all very highly decentralized. I mean, there's canon law and there, and again, the governance panel is going to talk more about those sorts of things. But it's this individualized. Everybody's got their own take on this, and there's really no enforcement mechanism. There's nobody telling you you've got to do this. It's really driven by the priorities of the institution. Sister, what are some of the other areas that you'd like to see if you were Pope? What are some of the other things you'd like? I mean, you talked for a minute about Laudato Si. What are some of the other things you'd like to focus on?
If I were Pope?
Yeah, if you were Pope. All right.
I would vote for it. I would vote for it.
With respect to investment, I got a lot of ideas on how to solve and I think you do too. But we're talking about investments today, right?
Again, referring to some countries besides the United States where there's such poverty and there's such need to do something when you think about plastics, and all of that. I think if I could invest in moving those countries and changing those governments, that's what I would try to do. And I do think that is something the Pope is trying to do very, very much, is to influence the governments there, and put money into empowering and teaching and training and giving a leg up to these people who want these changes, and who work towards them. So that's what I would do. Continue in that way, in a stronger way even, and those who have resources, help them to share those. So.
I agree with Matt's comment that the Catholic investing sometimes get a bad rap. Well, you're giving up earnings or investment return. I don't think you are, and the same screens you're looking at, I'm looking at. So, I trust in American companies. I read the Wall Street vigorously, and American companies are trying. I have an old client, a big steel company, and U.S. Steel closed a couple of its coke batteries. Coal, coke, hot burning fuel makes steel. And so they have a place also in Detroit, Ecorse, and that is, captures the pollutions, et cetera. So everyone's trying. If you invest in a value company who's following the guidelines of saving our planet and good things like that, we're going to invest in those better producing companies. So I'm like Sister. Let's improve the planet we live in, but also the needs of the much broader world. And so, we're starting to address that. Again, those are guidelines, and it's really up to the individual entity to decide where they want to go, but that is certainly the direction. And like we mentioned, USCC guidelines, we'll address those more on. So the Sisters of the Holy Cross invest parts of the world you just are amazed at. Uganda, Brazil, good things like that. So, God bless them for being ahead of the curve.
If I were Pope, Scott would
Investing.
investing. If
No,
I-
no, she's the Pope. You don't get
Right.
that.
Well, if Sister Suzanne was the Pope, I would want a $5 million allocation to Sequoia Capital and a $5 million allocation to Benchmark. I think that would be my top two priorities there. No, all kidding aside, I think dignity of work. If I could emphasize a point, I think that matters a lot. And so I know with our private equity partners, and a few in particular, they always cared about volume of waste material. They cared about water consumption. These were engineers. These were manufacturing companies. When a blast furnace in Weirton, West Virginia that employed 10,000 people and the town was only 20,000, if you can save that blast furnace or repurpose it, what does that do to humankind? And I think there's a lot of, today, I don't quite get it. My nephew, who's 16, they don't want to get their driver's license anytime soon. There's sometimes a hesitation to kind of work. And so I think there's a dignity of work. And I'm from Pittsburgh, and we're a working town. And I think there's dignity to work. And I think it will clash and potentially have friction with just technology disruption when technology displaces human beings and displaces jobs. And so, yes, they might be lower paying jobs, but there's dignity to those jobs. So I think if I were the Pope, I think potentially emphasizing dignity of work, also acknowledging the disruption of technology and what it's doing. Inevitably, that disruption is healthy in the sense that it benefits all. What John Rockefeller could do with the world's largest fortune wasn't a fraction of what you and I can do on a weekend. Get on an airplane, fly here, the phone. So I think that the technology and dignity of work need to be balanced. And so if I were Pope, I would emphasize the dignity of work, but I would also try to get in front of that friction too, because there are real social implications there.
Well, I mean, Sister, you've talked about it, but I mean, there are all these, particularly with the climate issues, I mean, it's a very nuanced, I think Sister Gina once said to me, well, I'm not going to stop flying in airplanes, right? And again, that's not an irresponsible, it's a very nuanced, and we've been looking at, again, technology has a lot of application. We'll talk about that a little more later. Tim Connors' panel about energy transformation, things like that. But I mean, there are positive ways to address these issues rather than. So what have we not talked about that we should have, Matt?
I think we haven't talked about it, but I think I go back to just when you mentioned the politicization and the monetization sometimes of SRI or ESG.
ESG, right.
And I'm guarded against that. So when we wrote policy, I led with, when these are investment products that are being advertised during the Super Bowl maybe, it makes you kind of stop and wonder, it doesn't sound right, doesn't feel right.
Yeah, we couldn't afford that.
Yeah, that's right. So I think I just go back to, when you talk, at least on the private side, the owner-operators that are trying to add value at the company level, just emphasizing, I think best practice will continue to dovetail with what we're trying to solve from the bishop's guidance. And I think the marketplace is already going there. Now we're just kind of repackaging it or recategorizing it. And so I think that's wonderful for society. I think it's wonderful for companies. If you're Jamie Dimon, you care about all constituents, all stakeholders. And I think we've kind of hinted about it, but I do want to emphasize, I think the marketplace is dovetailed nicely with efforts that we're trying to accomplish here at our individual institutions.
I'm thinking about what Scott said yesterday. We've established we have these great Catholic values, Catholic social teachings. How do we leverage that power, across entities? Every little Catholic tribe has its own little mission and how we invest. But as we pull that together, and I love hearing what we were doing at the Vatican level, how do we lever that to make those social changes, to help with hourly wages? When my son went to Sunday school, I said, what'd you learn? He goes, do good and don't do evil. So, okay, it's kind of concise with the social teachings, but it's really, the interesting part to me in the symposium, so thank you, is really how do we leverage that as a Catholic church? And you're accomplishing that with Catholic Investment Services, pooling the groups to do the social responsible thing, but let's continue the process.
Right, and we've got to again, I'm going to give a shout out to Tim Connors, who's been a really thoughtful leader on these issues through Fatica and in other ways, and he's going to lead our impact panel later. But that's a lot of things. That's very, you talk about the difference between screening and impact, but what the differences those are. But Sister, what have we not talked about that you'd like to?
We kind of have talked about it. I just want to emphasize the importance of the consistency of our behavior in aligning ourselves with these values that we're discussing. And one of the challenges, I think, as we are more and more into this, I think we have learned that you're not giving up your investments and.
Well, that's the elephant in the room, right? Everybody thinks there's trade-offs for doing this, right?
But I think that, we need to find better ways to monitor and measure the value that is being achieved.
I mean, how do you overcome that?
I think in many ways we have overcome it. I think we understand through our investments that we're not losing money by investing in good things. That as you see, in healthcare and so on, the better the quality, the less expensive it is. And so I think that we're not losing money on these investments. Probably losing money on other investments, but measuring the value, I think, is a challenge that because we're not there yet.
Well, we probably don't have enough history, right?
Yeah.
But we're benchmarking, constructed index. I mean, you have enough measurements on return.
Right.
I agree with Sister. When we give grants out of the foundation, we kind of have an expectation to say, and how did you use it? And how many people did you help? And how did you benefit the poor in our community? We take great pride. We created a women's shelter for single homeless women. Well, that's kind of an immediate, you can see the impact, but that's not true for all the grants that we make.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I know this is, I think we've got evidence here of the interest in this topic. I think the whole conference is, again, this is a focus of this is our mission. So I see Sophia with the microphones. I'm sure there've got to be some questions from the audience. I guess you did a pretty good job. Right, there we go. Here we go. Okay.
Hi, thank you for this conversation. I'm really interested in going a little deeper around this conversation around how do we embed our CSTs into the work that we're doing and the community, these voices that we're bringing to the table to assist in the decision-making that's occurring at the top level, where we sit with a lot of privilege because we control the money. So I'm wondering how you're bringing those who sit closest, those who may sit most close to the most marginalized, and the effects of climate change and the effects of an economy that might not be so equal. So sitting closer in solidarity with the community, how are you bringing those voices and what kind of conversations are you having around how and where to find those people, the young adults who are trying to get us to listen and be much more closer and deliberate to these issues and how we're making our decisions and where we're putting our money. So does that mean advisory boards? Does that mean seats at a decision-making table? The leaders who are sitting in the communities, who are serving the people that we say our charity is helping. So I'd love to hear deeper dialogue around that and how we're trying to develop more of this community, global community of solidarity that so much of our CSTs teach us to do. Thank you.
Go ahead.
That was a lot. Thank you for the question. For Duquesne, I've already thought of, okay, how do you engage constituents, including students? And so when there is activism, and it's been benign so far because the investment office has just been built or started. And so I've already anticipated when you have students that want to engage, have questions, have a no cell phone, be prepared, write it down, trusted environment where we can talk and debate and engage. But we also have various constituents of the local community of Duquesne. I mentioned the Spiritan mission of Duquesne and the founder who was just uncomfortable with people's lack of ability to pursue faith in healthcare and education. And so Duquesne's, in that vein, I think the founding Spiritans would be happy. We've just put $50 million into a city block to break ground on an osteopathic medical school. And so that involved every level of the community for probably about the last 5 or 7 years of planning, both in the city and outside the city, just through the accreditation process. So to meet just the medical needs of the urban and rural communities. In Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and a lot of rural in between. And so we are looking at it as a way to take the initiative, think long-term, engage all constituents, local, state, even nationally with the accreditation services to meet those medical needs. Now, that's one clear example of that, but I think you hit it where you need engagement of all people. So are they on the committee? Should they be on the committee? But I came from a firm that had a committee of one, and the governance should be odd numbers and three's too many. And I always thought that was comical, but it was really effective in doing things boldly and potentially in a contrarian manner as well. So there's advantages of having engagement. There's also significant cost to have too many people at the table as well. And so what that balance is, I don't know, but for Duquesne, I think we've tried to strike it, at least with the medical school, to engage in as many levels as possible. It wasn't easy at times, but I think everyone recognized the fact that there's unmet medical needs right now in the urban and rural communities. How do we meet that? Is Duquesne in a position to do that? We're in the shadows of the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. Those are behemoths in their respective fields. But Duquesne has found a way to kind of, I think, honor the founder's mission. So that's just an example. I don't know if it answers all your questions, but I think I agree with how you framed it. I think it just depends on the institution.
I think it's a great question too. And the diocese, we have certain monies that we allocate to the bishop that he can use kind of the venture projects, new things, startups, et cetera. Now I go back to my foundation hat, and it's really the great organizations we support. Catholic Charities, who's delivering those services down a lower level. Matthew 25 for uninsured or underinsured people in our community. Redeemer Radio, providing that message of who we are to our area. And actually, they're trying to expand beyond our diocese. So it's some of the underlying people that we've really tried to strengthen our relationships with to support them. In terms of our board, committees, advisory, we're looking at that. We want people with different perspectives. You learn quickly as you're on boards, it's not only your viewpoint, but other people's whose viewpoint you never even thought of. Whether they're a marketing skill or they're delivering services to those underserved or uninsured. So you want all that perspective, so we build it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful question, so thanks for asking that. And I was just thinking of St. Mary's College has a nursing program, and once a year for it's about a 6-week program, they go over to Uganda, and we have a clinic over there. And the nurses, because it's in Uganda, they get to deliver the babies, so they just can't wait to go over there. But, your question makes me think, well, why don't we ask those nurses to come back and report and talk to our committee? So I thank you for asking the question, and it makes me think we don't ask enough, and we need to find some ways to do that, to bring that diversity and integrate that into our thinking, so thank you.
We only have one microphone.
Oh, he's got
Jeremy's got one. All right. Well, good. Well, then, okay, great. All right.
Yeah, we hear so much about the principles and the guidelines for how we should be investing, but there's a lot of specifics, and reasonable people can disagree on when something is a good good investment or not a good investment. And I'm just wondering if we need an organization that can dive deeper into some of these issues and guide the decision makers, folks, choosing what investments to make and where to make them and so on, with more information. And I'm just wondering, is there a need there, or do you feel like you have all the information that you need for making good decisions on implementing the guidelines, from the Vatican and so on?
I think that's a good question for Tom. What do you think?
Well, we have our CIS Institute, which is focused on those sorts of issues. Now, could we use more funding for that? Yes. We'd love to build that out as a place for. Right now, it's a resource for a lot of Catholic investors. We've got a lot of good material there. We've done a lot of good webinars. I don't know if you participate in our webinar series, but we've got we had Jean Baptiste and Scott talk about Mensurum Bonum, and so we are trying to build that, but we're nonprofits, so we don't have infinite resources. We'd love to staff that up and have that be a dedicated function. So if any generous donors in the audience would like to support that. No, and seriously, that's one of the things we're looking at, is going out and trying to get some philanthropy to support more of our advocacy work and our thought leadership work, because it's really interesting, the feedback we get, with the positive feedback we get from Jeremy works very hard on our written materials, but also the webinars series that we have, which are not, if you look at them, they're not commercials for CIS, they're educational, they're trying to inform the Catholic investment community.
Yeah, I really encourage everybody to read their publications. They keep them up, they're current. Some of them are just the webinar is purely educational.
Right.
I personally like the one on the best practices of investment committee that they made me do a couple of years ago, but it's really the topical things, and they address those social issues in them. So how do I establish an investment policy? Okay, boring, but then how do I bring Catholic values and social teachings into that? And you're like, wow, okay, now I'm thinking about it. So, thank you for all you do.
Roger, you had a question.
Yep, Roger Aguinaldo, in private equity, run my own private equity firm, and sit on the investment committee of the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens. We have almost $2 billion of assets under management, and we've established, I've been on the committee since 2009, and over the past, I think it took about 7 years to develop an alternative private equity portfolio. So much like the people yesterday, it does take time to ramp up an alternative investment strategy. My questions are really on twofold. We have one of our people we use as a consultant is Mercer. I don't know anybody from Mercer in this room? Okay, I don't.
Don Warman was here.
Okay.
Don, yeah.
He
I don't want
wants to
to.
be careful what he says about
So they're good, but they're not good in one respect, right? They have information on lots and lots of different stuff, but the things that I've been looking for the past, 5-6 years when we've been looking for them, really fall into two categories. One is this benchmarking, right? So it's sort of an average benchmarking, 60-40, compare against nonprofit pension funds, but how does that relate to our pension fund? How does that relate to what we want to benchmark against? It's the first time I heard that the investments in Catholic social investing perform just as well as anything else. I've always thought that I'd pay a little bit of basis points to invest in what we want to invest in based upon our USCCP guidelines. But tell me what that number is. How many basis points am I paying for, right? For that. So one is benchmarking. I'd like to understand really what metrics you're using specifically. Mercer has not been able to figure it out for us. Two is, and what I've learned from this event over the past day is communication of that mission from an investment standpoint, right? How do you communicate? Because we're a pension fund of funds, we just invest. No, we have a mission of investing. And what is that mission? How do we communicate that mission to our constituents? Because we're not only there for your retirement, you're doing good through contributing to your pension fund, contributing to, well, and this is relevant because we just, in the Diocese of Brooklyn, went from a defined benefit plan to a 403B. And so, that pain, so that people are paying two pension fees, right? Like, why are we doing this? Well, if you communicate that we're doing some social good from Catholic values, that could sort of alleviate that, that pain and that communication. So really those two things. I appreciate your comments. Thanks.
Why don't we ask Matt to answer the benchmarking? The benchmarking.
I think we need to ask Scott, but go ahead.
Oh, wait, Scott can weigh in. He's
I think from measuring the performance, there are screen products that you can clearly measure against a unscreened, non-screened product. The privates, as you know, you're there to outperform the public benchmark, not necessarily a private benchmark. And so I think that's more governed around side letters and opt-out kind of language. And so I don't think Duquesne or Notre Dame perhaps would do a blind poll in a healthcare strategy without having some guardrails on legally at least to opt out. But as far as benchmarking, I think you can compare screened versus unscreened. That data is there. And then as far as the mission, I fully agree. I think you answered your question, though. I think that messaging is very easy for all constituents. But I put it in writing in the policy, one, because we are the only Spiritan institution of higher education. What does that mean? It is unique. And also, I'm fortunate enough to point to that medical school project down the street and say there's $50 million in that city block that is going to meet, the community's healthcare needs. And so we have a pharmacy school, we have a nursing school. We have all these schools. We were early to admit females, early to admit African Americans, even going back to 1910. And so we can point institutionally to data points. Now, if you're going to benchmark everyone, I think each person, each institution has its own mission. How they carry out that mission. It's not dissimilar to saying, Harvard versus Yale, and they're always competing against each other. They're very different. And Katie mentioned it yesterday. It's very different. And so if we're pursuing our mission, which is different, and we're meeting that and exceeding that, we can point to data points for all our constituents. And so I think it's case by case, institution by institution. But the benchmarking, it's going to become more clear. The data's there, the technology's there to continue to measure. And
Scott, you want to chime in on that for a minute?
Just the benchmarking part of it, could you repeat the question on the benchmarking?
Basically, I've asked Mercer.
Sister Teresa has a question.
What are our screening versus, because we have side letters as well, we opt out.
Yep.
What are we paying for our investment by not sort of being over there?
And this is just private equity?
Private equity, our entire company.
Yeah. That would take a lot of analysis.
Well, there are
But there's sort of the things you did, the things you didn't do. I mean, there's just, that's very complicated. We used to try to think about that, and we're using so much staff time, and it wasn't going to change what we're doing, because it's inherent to our work to have those screens. So we stopped even trying, and I didn't worry about that as much. People weren't asking me that anyways. But ultimately, a lot of those industries aren't particularly good businesses, and I never really felt we really were losing much, if anything, by not investing in a lot of those areas. So I think the benchmarking is very challenging. I'm not sure it's worth the pain to do all that work, honestly.
Roger, to your mission question, it occurred to me, I think one of the great legacies Scott left at Notre Dame was integrating the investment function with the advancement function and working together and using the investment success that they had investing in accordance with Catholic social teachings to kind of an integrated approach. So I think, you know, there are some examples of you know, communicating the kind of the best practices and good ideas. Sister Teresa, you had a question.
I think there's a question in here, and it's building on something someone said before. I'm an accountant, I'm Sister Teresa with the Daughters of Charity, and I'm an accountant, so there's my bias.
Well, you've got a fellow traveler right here.
Yeah. But I think all of our metrics are financial metrics. They're not economic metrics. And I don't know if there's opportunity for us for the industry, for the investment industry, to build in economic metrics. What's the downstream effect? Put the entire value together. Because we have divested from fossil fuels for the most part. There are some things that we want to invest in because we need alternative fuels. But I could be investing in alternative fuels and biofuels and taking down the Amazon, the rainforest. But I don't know that. That's an economic impact where I could have a great financial return, and I'm not measuring the negative side of the economic impact. And I think, you know, I want to do our Catholic investing in a way that looks at the totality of the impact of what we're doing and have a good return. Where can we put that? Whose burden is that to create new metrics that take in the full economic metric, the full value? I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. I agree with you, sister, that, you know, again, as we now consider that more, you know, the byproducts and the world measure of that, I think we're just starting to develop that. You know, the grant side on a foundation is easy. We can see, okay, where the money goes, how many, you know, did we serve at Matthew 25. But we're really starting to think bigger now about that values, but the metrics need to catch up a little bit. So ESG, you know, we didn't talk about that much. And, you know, everybody complains about it, politicized, or, gee, what's your metrics, or what's your standards? So they haven't quite figured all that. So, but again, directionally, we're in the right level, to be honest. So,
And I think yesterday, in one of the panels discussion, it was what is true, you know, and also looking at the risk strategy, and I think like of a company where it's agriculture, and things are changing in technology, and people are going to be out of jobs, and so on. So challenging that company to say, well, what's your strategy, you know, and what is true that will make this happen for both the company and the employees, you know? So I think it's a challenge to these, you know, to say, what's your strategy to do this? And I think, you know, one of the things with the mission question that occurs to me when we're doing things that it's really hard to measure the value of it. And I think especially with climate and all, you know, we all breathe the same air. Mm-hmm. And to convince people that this is true, we all breathe the same air, so we're all responsible for it. You know, we have to speak to that strategy also of that education. So.
All right, last call. Tara.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Tara Kenny, Investment Committee for Catholic Charities USA. Matt, you hinted at the politicization ongoing right now with the term ESG and the tying of ESG to woke, which has been a newer phenomenon. Yeah. Certainly for one who's currently teaching a course at Notre Dame on the subject matter, didn't have to address this last year, but we certainly do this year. Right. Even Larry Fink's letter this year, there's not a mention of ESG in the 5 or 6 page letter. Just as Catholic practitioners, as investors in this Catholic universe, is there a responsibility for us to counter that backlash, to talk about including ESG as a tool, not a mandate, but a tool to look at risk in portfolios and the long-term returns if we don't consider these as I call, tools. Thank you.
Short answer is yes, and there's a dedicated section in the policy I wrote that, well, you could have wrote the policy. My policy says just that. It is a tool, it's a consideration. It's not solely the consideration, but it absolutely is, through our diligence efforts, a consideration. And so, we're seeing data rooms for private equity firms that have dedicated folders for ESG and, their ESG footprint. So you're seeing the best practices, you're seeing those that get it implemented. And from a policy standpoint, when it starts with policy, that is clearly addressed in the policy that I wrote, just to say it is an absolute important consideration, just not the only consideration.
I agree. It's a tool belt thing. It's something to consider. It's another measurement. Okay, let's throw in the United Nations thing. Let's throw in the Vatican. So you factor all that in. Yes, it's very politicized now, and so you shouldn't hide it or we can't do that. I think you embrace it as another strategy, in the honesty of our great Earth or human needs, human dignity. So, it's really a part of that. So.
I guess I'd just like to see us Catholic University.
Yeah.
More outspoken about the advocacy on that.
Well, thank you. You did a great job. I'm sorry.
Sister. No.
Did a great job. And please, audience, please join me in thanking our panel.